Well, we've been talking about the three covenants to success over the last number of weeks, or couple of weeks, 2 weeks, I guess. Before that, we started talking about covenants, what covenants were, what a covenant meant, what it stood for. Then we started saying, okay, the three covenants to success out of Joshua chapter 1. And today I want to go to the third covenant, and it's found in verses 16 to 18. Now, the first covenant we know, of course, was between God and the people. When God made covenant with the people and God began to say, I will be your God. I will be with you. You go ahead and do this. Only be strong and be of good courage. You do this, but be strong. And then the second covenant was between the leadership and when I prefer to call it the followership, because I really don't know what else to call it. You know, if there's a leader, there has to be a follower. So if there's leadership, there has to be followership, right? So the second covenant was between the leadership and the followership. But the third covenant is between the followership and the leadership. And that one is found in Joshua chapter 1, and we're going to start at verse 16. So the leaders have just gone out and told the people what Joshua had told them about the next day getting up, getting ready, because they're going to be entering the promised land. And then in verse 16, the people answered Joshua, saying, all that thou commandest us we will do, whithersoever thou sendest us we will go. According as we hearkened unto Moses in all things, so will we hearken unto thee. Only the Lord thy God be with thee as he was with Moses. Whosoever he be that doth rebel against thy commandments, and will not hearken unto thy words in all that thou commandest him, he shall be put to death. Only be strong and of good courage. Now there's a group of followers that a lot of leaders would give their right arms for. This is what's being said, and the leaders turn around and say, well, everything you tell us to do, we're going to do. Everything that you tell us is going to be done, and only God be with you, and if anybody doesn't do what you're going to do, we're going to kill them. Wouldn't go over well in a lot of places. But it's one of the part of the covenant here about how God was speaking and what was happening, and the heart is shown of these people, of how they're willing to take part of this covenant and to follow what God wants. But again, we see the order here, and the people, first of all, mention the order. The first covenant has to be with God. So they turn around, they say to Joshua, we will do what you say as long as the Lord is with you. We will follow you where you're going, only if God is with you. Now, I mentioned last week, if you're seeking God, God will end up putting leaders into your life who have come into covenant with Him. Everybody that is seeking God will be able to have the opportunity to find leaders that are installed by God or brought up by God that will be able to speak godly wisdom and godly counsel. Now, these leaders will carry the marks that we outlined last time in the scriptures as being the leaders that are worthy to lead. They will carry those marks. They won't be, and it goes on to the list that we read last week from where Paul was writing to the church. He says, this is what the bishop should be about, this is what the deacon should be about, and these leaders will bear those marks. But one of the main things that I think we often forget with leaders is that leaders need to be in covenant with other leaders. Leaders need to be connected with other leaders. Every time I hear of independent leaders rising up, it causes something inside of me to get concerned. Somebody that doesn't follow, somebody that has this great new revelation, somebody that is free to just go wherever they want to go and they have nobody to hold them accountable, then right away I start thinking there's a problem with this person's life. When we first started the church, one of the first things we did was we ended up looking for accountability. We looked for a headship. We found CFCM at that time, Canadian Fellowship of Churches and Ministers. We went and talked to them. We began to share. They had somebody in Manitoba. They said, okay. We began to work together. We worked with their authority. And we got to recognize that there was stuff we could learn from those leaders. When Victory Churches expanded this far that they were able to accept the responsibility of having a church out here, we approached them. We said, I want to come home. I was born again in Victory Churches. That was my home place. I want to come home. We want to bring, and they began to talk and said, okay, this is who we are. This is what we stand for. This is what we believe. We can hold you accountable. You can speak in here. Every time there is a leader that is ordained of God in the New Testament day, I believe they need to be connected with other leaders. In the Old Testament, we had the day of the independent prophet. There was always one prophet that would rise up, and he would speak the will of God, and he would speak forth, and there was always one major prophet that was the one that had the voice of the nation. But in the New Testament, we operate under body ministry. It's no longer the independent prophet that rises up. It is the body that needs to be brought to the forefront. When Paul writes into the church at Ephesus, he talks about the apostle, the prophet, the evangelist. The pastor and the teacher have been put in the church to perfect the saints for the work of the ministry. Well, just in that, we have what we call the fivefold ministry, or the fivefold ministry giftings. But even there, the fivefold ministry can help each other be responsible for where they are. Now at Victory Churches International, we have the apostolic leader, Dr. George, but Dr. George Hill is not out there by himself. He has a group of advisors that he ministers to, that minister to him, that he opens himself up to hold himself accountable. A group of men that have proven themselves as being faithful, that have proven themselves as being trustworthy, that are able to speak into Dr. George's life and give direction and give input, and they work together and they minister together, and they say, okay, we have a leadership here. It's not one man on whom everything rises and falls. But when you get into that type of situation, you are probably in a very scary place. When I talk to people, we have different people that'll come and they'll ask, and they'll or write notes, and they'll write letters or emails, say, well, we'd like to come and minister at the church there. One of the first things I ask is, who is your head? Well, we're independent. God called us to just be out here by ourselves, and that way we could minister to a much wider... Not interested, thank you. If you can't submit to a headship, you're not worthy of leading. The moment you tell me there's no headship, I'm no longer interested in hearing anything you have to say. In fact, the moment you tell me that you're not connected with somebody else, you've told me that you have an independent and rebellious spirit. Come on. This is much better teaching. I know this isn't popular. I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, but that's one of the very first things that we're going to have to watch for. Are we, and headship is not an unusual thing in covenants. Even in covenant, you'll always have the head of the covenant, or the leader of the covenant, if you would, whatever you want to call the stronger and the weaker that are covenanting together. This is why in the marriage covenant, the Bible speaks to husbands and says, treat your wives as a weaker vessel. Now, as every husband has found out, the wife doesn't mean the wife is a weaker vessel. It just says we're to treat her like that. Treat her with greater respect. Treat her with greater forbearance. Treat her properly. It says to treat your wives as a weaker vessel, but it leaves the impression when Paul writes, or God speaks through Paul, and he says the husband is the head. There's a stronger, there's a weaker. Now that doesn't mean that, oh wow, this one is so much greater and that was... No, it just means that they have different places and different positions. Now their strengths come into play as that covenant starts getting built. Their strengths will come into play, and each one will end up being able to sharpen the other and improve the other. But for the leader that goes out there by themselves and says, I don't need a covenant with anybody, I'm just going to go out and do my own thing, is setting himself up for failure. Proverbs, as Daniel mentioned today, Solomon spoke so much wisdom. Proverbs says, in the multitude of counselors, there is wisdom. It comes when you open yourself up to hear. It comes when you open yourself up to listen. So the leaders that God brings into your life will be leaders that carry the marks that are outlined in the scriptures as those that are worthy to lead, and they will be connected to other leaders. They will have other leaders that can speak into their lives and begin to minister back and forth. When every time something serious has happened at Christ Full Gospel Fellowship, different things that have happened. Pastor Jerry's sister passed away. Dr. Hazel is on the phoning and saying, hey, we're connected. We're in covenant. When I needed to go for surgery, I got a phone call from Dr. Hazel's and Dr. George. And they're saying, we're praying for you. We're believing. There's a connection. We're not separate. We're not so far apart that they can't hear. Pastors Terry and Terry out of Regina, I'm on the phone with them, I don't know, probably twice, 3 times a month that we're calling them. Getting information. Well, do you have to hear what they say? I want to hear what they're saying. When I call Pastor Tribble or Pastor Funk out of Verdun there, Clausen, I keep wanting to call him Funk, get his name straight. John. When I call them, it's never a situation where